When you think about emerging markets, Africa and the Middle East certainly come to mind, and they're certainly on the minds of John Cutts, who is the chief executive of Pall Mall Capital, and he joins me now on INSEAD Knowledge from the INSEAD Leadership Summit Europe. Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
How much business is there in countries like Africa, the Middle East, in emerging markets? I mean, how do you see this?
There is plenty of business, there are plenty of opportunities, but one has to be very selective about those opportunities, and we focus very much in seeking those opportunities in telecommunications, to some extent in utilities, and I'd include water in that, and to some extent food, because remember, for Africa, agriculture is very important.
When we think about Africa, for example, and I know you do a lot of business in Africa of a large scale, I tend to think of a lot of microfinance or private equity. Is there a role for private equity in some of these bigger, large-scale projects as well?
Yes, there certainly is a role for private equity, particularly in the big infrastructure and utility projects. We were very much involved in the reorganization of the mobile telephone industry of East Africa at a time when Vivendi had to sell its investments there. And that was the first time that we experienced a transaction that was in excess of $200 million.
And you're involved in emerging markets. Which are you most interested in at the moment?
We've always tried to do one major corporate transaction in Africa each year. We were obviously involved with Celtel. We recapitalized Bank of Africa. Just at the moment, we're concentrating quite hard on opportunities in the Middle East, in particular in Abu Dhabi, and we are looking at opportunities where Abu Dhabi is investing in the West, but also where Western investors are seeking opportunities in Abu Dhabi.
So how is the market for these sorts of financial advice services? I mean, people are coming to you and saying, I want to get into Africa. Should I go there? Where should I go? What are you actually doing?
The sort of business that we get involved in is very much by referral. It's very, very difficult to go into those marketplaces and try and market yourself from a distance. You have to take it step by step. We have a small team, and we try and make sure that if we go in, we can add value.
In terms of the global economy, what is your take on this? I mean, you're involved right now with a lot of growth, but you've also done, cross-border advice.
What we're experiencing, firstly, is that the economy is, I would suggest it's stabilizing, though it's a very uncomfortable stabilization. I think a lot of people are very concerned as to what is going to happen next. However, we are seeing companies using the uncertainty to improve their strategic advantage. So as long as they can do that without recourse to bank financing, because I think the real question mark in everybody's mind is how long it'll take for the banking industry to function again in what I would call a normal way. I still think we're going to have a very bumpy ride in 2010, particularly in the Eurozone, while the weaker economies in Europe have to adjust their internal policies, and the larger economic entities have got to understand how they're going to position themselves in that context.
Are you worried about the current situation in terms of debt and what that's doing to the euro, for example? I mean, you must be exposed to all these different currencies.
The level of sovereign indebtedness is troubling. I think particularly the weaker economies in the southern part of Europe have been allowed to overborrow, and I think there will be a lot of civil unrest. We've already seen that in Greece, and we are probably going to experience that also in Spain and Portugal, and that is a difficult environment for people to invest into.
One point that was brought out at this morning's plenary session was that, in fact, the emerging countries' economies hadn't been affected quite as badly because they weren't well integrated into mainstream economy, or was there some other reason?
No, I think that for example, India, Brazil, they turned to the Western developed economies as sources of capital. they have been able to develop their own internal sources of capital very effectively because they have achieved growth. China has achieved very substantial and sustainable growth. And we're now seeing Indian companies, we've helped Indian companies buy companies in Western Europe. There are lots of opportunities that will result from that. And I suspect that that will become a much more acceptable activity for the future. So we're predicting an increase in cross-border activity, a lot of it driven by the emerging economies.
And so what do business schools need to be teaching their students to be able to deal with this kind of a world going forward?
Well, I think two or three things. Firstly, business schools need to teach people how to operate in crisis. When I attended INSEAD, we already said then it would be very useful to be able to learn how to deal, when things were really not going according to plan. So it's the ability to think outside the box. I think the second thing is to be able to look at a downside scenario without being frightened by it. I think fear is not a good environment in which to take decisions. And I think the third thing is to be able to manage the resources that are available to you. And in everything that I've been describing, it's all cross-cultural. If you're trying to do things in a cross-border environment, you have got to be able to operate across cultures. That's something that business schools, and particularly INSEAD, are very able to teach. But it's a combination of all three.
All right. Well, John Cutts, thank you very much for being with us on INSEAD Knowledge.
Thank you very much for letting me come.